They thought your reactions were proof of your weakness. They thought your anger was a leash they could pull. They thought your tears were currency they could spend. But they never prepared for the day the machinery inside you simply stopped. Not out of defeat, out of clarity. Because the moment you stop feeding the fire, the arsonist doesn't get peace. They get ash. And ash doesn't whisper. It settles. You have been speaking into a room engineered to absorb your voice without echoing it back. You've learned the exhausting geometry of anticipating their moods, calibrating your tone, swallowing your truth so it doesn't fracture the fragile equilibrium they call stability. You felt the slow erosion of your own certainty. The way you second-guess your memories because they rewrite them. The way your nervous system stays coiled, waiting for the next shift in atmospheric pressure, bracing for an impact that never fully lands but always leaves a bruise. You aren't broken. You're just depleted from carrying the emotional load of two people while being blamed for the weight. And somewhere beneath the fatigue, you've started to feel it, a quiet, deliberate withdrawal. Not a retreat. A realignment. You're done translating yourself for an audience that only listens to find the next fault line. Chapter 1. The Architecture of Exhaustion. You didn't arrive at this silence by accident. It was forged in the quiet aftermath of repeated violations you were never permitted to name. Every time you spoke, they deflected. Every time you drew a line, they treated it as a negotiation. You learned, through brutal repetition, that your emotional honesty wasn't received. It was cataloged, stored, and later deployed when it was most inconvenient for you. So you adapted. You became a shock absorber for their volatility. You started managing their instability instead of protecting your own center. And the cost? A slow, invisible fragmentation of your own identity. You began doubting your instincts. You apologized for requiring consistency. You mistook their intermittent warmth for affection when it was really just system maintenance. This isn't moral failure. It's the precise psychological toll of chronic invalidation. Your nervous system wasn't designed to run on emotional fumes indefinitely. The heaviness you feel isn't weakness. It's a biological alarm. Your mind has finally stopped trying to solve a maze that was walled off the moment you stepped inside. Chapter 2. The Geometry of the Unanswered Call. They didn't see the moment you left. Because you didn't slam the door. You simply stopped picking up when their chaos dialed through. You stopped offering explanations for fractures they engineered. You ceased performing the emotional labor they outsourced to your chest. What they interpreted as surrender was actually a structural detachment. They missed it because they were looking for spectacle. A final confrontation. A dramatic rupture that would allow them to paint you as the unstable one, the one who couldn't handle reality. But real detachment is silent. It's the systematic removal of your nervous system from their ecosystem. When you stop reacting, you don't give them the friction they require to maintain their illusion of control. You become unmoored, unreadable, and to someone who survives by mapping your responses to stabilize their own volatility, your stillness isn't peace, it's a vacuum. They will reach for the familiar triggers. Push, provoke, manufacture urgency. And when the machinery doesn't turn, the architecture they built your dynamic on begins to buckle. They aren't losing your devotion. They're losing the mechanism that allowed them to avoid facing their own reflection. Chapter 3. The Mechanics of the Extinction Burst. Let's dissect what happens when the reinforcement schedule collapses. In behavioral psychology, when a conditioned response suddenly stops producing its expected outcome, the subject doesn't accept the silence. They escalate. It's called an extinction burst. A frantic, often amplified attempt to force the feedback loop back online. This is precisely why your non-reaction triggers such profound dissonance in them. For months, maybe years, your anger, your pleading, your careful over-explaining, they weren't just words. They were data. Proof that they still controlled the dial to your emotional state. Your reactions regulated their internal discomfort. You were the pressure valve. Now that the valve is sealed, the pressure has nowhere to go but inward. Psychologically, this initiates a cascade. First, cognitive friction. Then, behavioral escalation. They will resurrect old grievances. They will test your boundaries with surgical precision. They may even curate a narrative of victimhood for anyone watching. This isn't love attempting to bridge a gap. It's neurological withdrawal. Their autonomic nervous system is experiencing the sudden absence of a co-regulation tool they never had to earn. You are witnessing the raw mechanics of emotional dependency masquerading as connection. The moment you refuse to engage in the rhythm, they don't learn a new dance. They just stumble, realizing they never learned how to stand without your weight propping them up. Chapter 4. The Echo of the Unseen Debt. Watch what unfolds in the stillness. They will not adapt gracefully to your absence. They will fracture around it. The narrative they carefully curated, where you were the volatile one, the overthinker, the one who cared too much, dissolves when the stage goes dark. And the human mind, when confronted with the collapse of a convenient story, does not choose accountability. It chooses projection. They will paint you as cold, detached, unfeeling. They will invert the timeline to make your silence the betrayal, rather than the inevitable consequence of sustained erosion. But beneath the performance, a heavier truth begins to settle. The invisible debt they outsource to you starts accumulating in their own chest. They will feel the gravitational pull of every dismissed boundary, every apology you accepted to keep the peace, every time they treated your empathy as a limitless reservoir, only to discover it has a floor. You are no longer their mirror. You are the empty space that forces them to finally see what they've been avoiding in the reflection. This isn't cosmic justice. It's psychological physics. When the regulator steps out, the system doesn't self-correct. It destabilizes under the weight of its own unexamined patterns. And they are left standing in the quiet, searching for a hand to pull them out, while refusing to acknowledge they were the one who dug the trench. Chapter 5. The Sovereignty of Stillness. This is not about becoming stone. It is about becoming sovereign. What you are experiencing is not emotional detachment. It is the precise, surgical removal of your nervous system from a toxic equation. You are learning to trust the quiet not as a punishment, but as architecture. You don't need to justify your stillness. You don't need to broadcast your evolution. You simply inhabit it. And in that space, the foundation of your own mind begins to rebuild. The chronic hypervigilance lifts. Your nervous system downshifts from perpetual survival to baseline regulation. You stop auditing your words before you speak them. You stop bracing for the aftershocks of conflicts you refuse to fund. This is strategic autonomy. Revenge keeps you tethered to their timeline. Autonomy severs the cable entirely. You become the quiet observer of your own life, no longer an active participant in their chaos. You learn that your value was never measured by how much emotional labor you could absorb before splintering. It was determined the exact moment you decided to stop financing a war you never signed up to fight. The silence you once feared is now your operating system. It is where you reclaim your energy. It is where you finally breathe, without asking for clearance. Let them chase the ghost of the person who used to bend. Let them fracture against the quiet they tried to weaponize. You don't need their understanding to validate your exit. You don't need their apology to justify your peace. You only need your own certainty. The space between you isn't empty. It's fortified. The door is locked from the inside.